The story of the Washington quarter dollar 1973 begins many decades before the coin was actually minted because its design history is deeply rooted in the early 20th century when the United States sought to honor the nation's first president, George Washington, with a circulating coin. The Washington quarter was first introduced in 1932 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth, and although the original plan was to use the design for just 1 year, the coin became so popular that it replaced the standing Liberty quarter permanently. By the time 1973 arrived, the Washington quarter had already established itself as one of the most recognizable circulating coins in American history, and it continued to reflect the evolution of American coinage politics, economics, and minting technology. The year 1973 is especially interesting because it sits in a period of major transformation for the United States Mint. Only 8 years earlier, in 1965, America had ended the production of silver quarters and replaced them with clad copper-nickel compositions in response to rising silver prices and widespread coin hoarding. By 1973, the clad quarter was still considered relatively new, and many collectors were paying close attention to the quality of the strikes. The performance of the new planchets and the overall appearance of the coins produced at the Philadelphia and Denver mints. The clad composition featured an outer layer of copper-nickel bonded to a pure copper core, and although it lacked the luster and weight of the earlier silver issues, it demonstrated better durability for modern circulation needs. On the obverse side, the 1973 Washington quarter continued using the famous portrait of George Washington, designed by sculptor John Flanagan, whose design was selected from a group of submissions in 1931. The portrait shows Washington facing left with the word "Liberty" above his head and the motto, "In God We Trust," to the left. The date appears at the bottom, and for 1973, the font and position remained consistent with the post-1965 design standard. Flanagan's portrait had experienced many subtle modifications over the decades, and by 1973, additional refinements had been made to accommodate modern minting technology and improve strike clarity, especially in the hair details and the lower neckline. The reverse design of the 1973 quarter features a heraldic eagle with wings spread clutching a bundle of arrows and an olive branch symbolizing both the strength and desire for peace that define the American spirit. The design includes the words United States of America and E pluribus unum above the eagle and the denomination quarter dollar below. Although this reverse design remained consistent for many years, experts often observe that the details and sharpness of the eagle vary notably from one mint to another and from 1 year to another depending on die wear and production pressure. The 1973 issues reflect the typical characteristics of early 1970s clad quarters, which often show slightly weaker strikes, particularly in the eagle's feathers. 3 minting facilities were involved in the production of Washington quarters during the early 1970s, but for 1973, only 2 mints produced regular circulation strikes. The Philadelphia Mint struck coins without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint produced coins with the D mint mark, placed to the right of the ribbon under the eagle on the reverse. The San Francisco Mint also made 1973 quarters, but exclusively as proof coins intended for collectors and not for general circulation. These proof coins bear the S mint mark and are struck with polished dies on specially prepared planchets, delivering a stunning mirror-like finish that contrasts sharply with frosted design features. The Philadelphia minted 1973 quarter is widely available today because millions were produced. But collectors often note that finding examples with sharp strikes in uncirculated condition can be a challenge due to the heavy use of dies and high-speed production. The Denver Mint produced an even larger number of 1973 D quarters, and these coins are generally more sharply struck than their Philadelphia counterparts, but they also suffer from common contact marks because of their high mintage and massive distribution. High-grade Denver examples are easier to locate, but Securing a flawless specimen requires patience and careful inspection. The 1973 S-Proof quarter is highly regarded among collectors for its clarity, sharpness, and overall visual appeal. These proofs were sold in sets to collectors and were never intended for everyday use. The cameo and deep cameo varieties are particularly prized because the contrast between frosted devices and mirrored fields is especially strong for this year, making them attractive display pieces. The process of creating these proofs required multiple strikes and meticulous die preparation, resulting in sharply defined details that stand out far more clearly than those on circulation strikes. Economically, the early 1970s were a complicated time for the United States, with inflation, rising energy issues growing, and the aftermath of the 1965 Coinage Act still influencing decisions at the Mint. Because the Mint was focused on creating reliable high-volume coinage for a growing population, the priority during 1973 was producing durable, practical quarters rather than experimenting with new compositions or designs. The clad quarter remained the most cost-effective solution, and by 1973, the public had fully accepted the new weight and appearance of clad coinage. Collectors today value the 1973 Washington quarter mostly for its historical context, rather than rarity, because the year does not contain major errors or intentional variations. However, minor die varieties can be found, including double die obverse or reverse examples, weakly struck eagles die cracks, and off-center strikes, though these are usually scarce and command attention mainly among specialist collectors. The overall value of a 1973 quarter in circulated condition remains low because so many were produced, but uncirculated and proof examples, especially those with exceptional luster or cameo contrast, often achieve strong premiums. The Washington quarter of 1973 represents a bridge between the early classic era of American silver coinage and the fully modern age of clad circulation coinage. It serves as a reminder of the changes that took place within the Mint and the broader economy and reflects the nation's continued respect for George Washington, whose image has appeared on the quarter for more than 90 years. Whether examined by a historian, a numismatist, or a casual collector, the 1973 quarter stands as a fascinating piece of American monetary history and continues to circulate today as a symbol of national identity, tradition, and the evolution of American currency. The Washington quarter dollar of 1973 gains even more depth when viewed within the broader historical timeline of American coin production during a period when the United States Mint was undergoing steady modernization. The early 1970s marked a transitional era for American coinage policy because the Mint was moving away from traditional craftsmanship and embracing high-speed, fully mechanized systems that could produce hundreds of millions of coins each month. This shift deeply affected the character of coins like the 1973 quarter because the tools, dies, and planchets used in its production were part of these updated systems which prioritized quantity and uniformity over artistic sharpness. As a result, many 1973 quarters show the typical circulation strike softness that is characteristic of the early clad era, where the metal composition and minting techniques were still being refined to create the best possible results for the public. To further understand the 1973 quarter, one must consider how the nation's economy influenced its mintage levels and distribution patterns. The United States in the early 1970s faced inflationary pressures and shifts in consumer behavior, which drove increased demand for circulating coinage. Businesses, banks, and retail industries required stable coin supplies to keep cash flow systems running smoothly. In response, the Mint allocated considerable resources to quarter production because the 25-cent denomination was one of the most heavily used coins in commerce, especially for vending machines, parking meters, laundromats, and public transport systems. This high demand explains why the Philadelphia and Denver mints produced hundreds of millions of 1973 quarters, despite the absence of any commemorative purpose or special events tied to the year. Another important aspect of the 1973 Washington quarter's story involves the gradual decline of silver coin hoarding, which had soared in the 1960s. Even though circulating quarters had not contained silver since 1965, many Americans continued storing older silver quarters long after the transition because of the belief that precious metal-based currency was inherently more valuable and stable.